So, is the consistency when it's spoken, is there a same consistency when it's written, or is it written at all?
So instances of written AAVE are not as well represented, especially in the field of linguistics. The field of linguistics is primarily concerned with spoken word. There have, especially recently, been more written texts with AAVE. I don't know about the consistency of those forms. I would imagine they're pretty consistent, but most of the linguistic studies are on spoken English.
When you, so you said it's like consistent, and that makes it a separate language or dialect. So is that in linguistics more broadly? Is that how you determine a language, just statistically?
No. So like I was saying, the discourse about language versus dialect is very complicated. There's a famous theory that a language comes with an army and a navy versus a dialect, and so it becomes political and social. What's challenging is that to linguists, there is there's a political barrier for a language, and a dialect might have distinctive features, but doesn't necessarily have the same political muscle. The problem comes that there's also a social definition for those things. So socially, we would call a language something that's not intelligible to our language. If I don't understand it, then it's a separate language entirely. But then at the same time, socially, a dialect is often thought of as something that's deficient, which I'm hoping in my presentation I'm explaining is not the case for AAV. It's not deficient, it's just a difference. So you kind of run into problems when the technical definitions and the social definitions meet, I guess. So there isn't really a real answer, I guess.
Any other questions?
Yes?
So I'm curious about this 70, 80, 90% consistency idea. So what exactly is the thought there that if you take someone who self-identifies as being a member of the group in question, that 70 or 80% of the time they will speak according to these rules?
Right.
Or, 70% of whom or what
right.
conform to these rules?
So the study that I'm referring to is one where it is self-identified speakers of AAVE. And I said 70, 80, 90 because for different features it has different representations. But the way I understand it to work is that once somebody has self-identified and is part of this study, what they're doing is looking at a particular feature, and it's just a general interview. Like the interview that you have in front of you is about the existence of heaven and God, and it's in doing those kinds of interviews that they then go through. It's what a lot of linguistic analysis is going through all sorts of interviews on different subjects and highlighting the different grammatical forms and how often they occur. And so I think the percentages are in each person's interviews, how often in that grammatical form it happens, how often when it's a construction of, let's say, this negative indefinite subject that I was talking about, how often that is done with this AAVE grammar and how often it's done with a different or standard English grammar, if that makes sense.
And I assume that sort of the unspoken premise is that 70, 80 or 90% compares favorably to other dialects or languages that people might self-identify as speaking.
Sure.
So.
The way I feel personally in terms of linguistics is that things that can be considered a dialect are just have distinct grammars in some capacity. There are a lot of things that are accent. There are a lot of things that are dialectal features, but aren't necessarily a dialect in full. And so, personally, the way I analyze linguistics would be that, yeah, the 70, 80, and 90% frequency is a lot higher than something that's a feature of a language that is employed haphazardly. If that makes sense.
Thank you.